Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CC EduSet live lecture. Dear friends, as you know that in our previous session we talked on relative grounds for refusal of trademark registration. We would be continuing on this very topic today also, and we would be taking a case study as well as we would be discussing one new provision. And for this discussion we have once again with us Mr. Ashwini Sewal. Mr. Ashwini Sewal is Assistant Professor in IP Laws, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. So dear friends, let's welcome our guest Mr. Ashwini Sewal, under whose able guidance we would be discussing on relative grounds for refusal of trademark registration. Hello sir, welcome to the EduSet lecture.
Thank you. Welcome friends. We started covering the prohibitions relating to relative grounds for the refusal of registration in the Trademarks Act 1999. In our previous discussion, I have dealt with section 11(1) that primarily covers the use of the similar identical trademark on similar identical goods or services. We have seen the intricacies and the nuances of section 11(1) in my previous discussion. We have to take up a case study on this particular provision or a prohibition of use of a trademark on similar goods or on similar services. Well friends, the bottom line to understand this case study is section 11(1), which says that identical similar trademark shall not be registered on similar / identical goods or services. Well, for this particular provision, the case study that is on screen right now is K.R. Chinna Krishna Chettiar versus Shri Ambal and Company, AIR 1970 Supreme Court 146. Well friends, this case study is very celebrated one, where you see the impugned words or the words which were in contention were Ambal and Andal. I told you that Ambal and Andal are two different goddesses worshipped in south part of our nation, India. Both are different divinities worshipped by different people altogether, but still, as far as their name is concerned and its pronunciation is concerned, its utterance is concerned, it seems that it is more or less sounding similar or resembles in the sound. Moreover, resembles in the visual appearance as well. The word written Ambal seems similar to the word written Andal. The difference is of only one letter in this word. Well friends, let us take up this battle in a detail and see what was the outcome of this case law, because this outcome is operative even today as far as the interpretation of section 11(1) is concerned in India of the Trademarks Act 1999. Well, in this case law friends, respondents were trying to register a label containing a device of goddess Shri Ambal in the center with the legend Shri Ambal Parimala Snuff at the top of the label and the name Shri Ambal and Company Madras at the bottom was written. This is the mark of the respondents which was already registered, and it is a device. Well friends, I have reiterated it many times that a trademark can be obtained on a particular article or on a particular goods or services in a one class, and that has to be specifically mentioned as to on what kind of goods or services the person, the applicant, seeks to register the trademark or has registered the trademark. Well, one more thing that I have already discussed several times with my audience and with my viewers, that a trademark registered and that appears in the registry of the registering authority, sometimes it is a single mark or sometimes it is a composite mark. A single mark in the form of a single word as a trademark, a label as a trademark, or a device as a trademark, and it can be so many things. I mean, whatever falls under section 21M has the capacity to become a subject matter of trademark, has the capacity to be given a trademark protection under the Trademarks Act 1999. So the present label containing a device of goddess Shri Ambal in the center, it's a label actually which the respondent got registered few years back, It's a label containing a device in the form of the pictorial representation of the goddess Sri Ambal in the center, with the legend Sri Ambal Parimala Snuff at the top of the label, and the same Sri Ambal and Company, Madras at the bottom. So this whole label comprises so many things. I mean, the written description, the pictorial representation, device in the form of the goddess Sri Ambal. If you see the contentious mark, the impugned mark of the appellant, over which the appellant sought registration, it also consists a label containing 3 panels. The first and the third panel contain in Tamil, Devanagari, Telugu and Kannada the equivalents of the word Sri Andal Madras Snuff. The center panel contains the picture of goddess Sri Andal and the legend Sri Andal. Well, if you see, friends, the appellant's application for seeking the registration on the label containing 3 panels, the basic or the important features of this particular label over which they sought a registration were the word Sri Andal Madras Snuff, the center panel containing the picture of goddess Sri Andal and the legend Sri Andal written there. Well, friends, I believe you are in a position right now, from the reading of these 2 different kinds of features of the trademarks Ambal and Andal, to determine and to gaze that there lies some sort of a similarity as far as the label is concerned of both the parties, of the respondent as well as of the appellant. So appellant was seeking the registration, but the registrar of the trademarks, instead of refusing the registration on the grounds provided under section 11(1), went ahead with the registration in favor of the appellant, saying that these 2 different labels or words don't so nearly resemble with one another to lead to this confusion or association of the trademark. If you see on the screen, the registrar's finding, he held that the sound of Ambal did not so nearly resemble the sound of Andal, in spite of certain letters being common to both the marks, as to be likely to cause confusion or deception among a substantial number of persons. Well, friends, as far as the finding of the registrar of the trademarks is concerned, which is a first instance authority in this case, it seems that he erred in finding the appropriate provision or appropriate law of the land. What he decided was not uprighteous or was not righteous as far as this present contention is concerned, or as far as these 2 impugned words in question are concerned. See, their use of the words Ambal and Andal, you see, these 2 words are similar words, not identical, but used on identical goods. So section 11(1) says straight away that any such use of an similar trademark on identical goods shall not be registered if there exists a likelihood of confusion which includes likelihood of association. This is what we learnt yesterday in my discussion, that section 11 covers these situations and does not allow the registration to be done in the register of the registering authority. Well, the registrar's findings were challenged by the appellant before the High Court, and Justice Jagdishan observed in the High Court that words Ambal and Andal have such great phonetic similarity. Well, friends, if you see the findings of the Justice Jagdishan of the High Court observed here on your screen, it reads that these 2 words have such great phonetic similarity that they are undistinguishable, having the same sound and pronunciation. In whatever way they are uttered or spoken, slowly or quickly, perfectly or imperfectly, meticulously or carelessly, and whoever utters them, a foreigner or a native of India, wherever they are uttered in the noisy marketplace or in a calm and secluded area, over the phone or in person, the danger of confusion between 2 phonetically allied names is imminent and unavoidable. Well, friends, if you see that the finding of the Madras High Court Justice Jagdishan is categorically saying that these 2 words are undistinguishable, having the same sound and pronunciation. And the key rule of getting the trademark register is to show the capacity of distinguishing the goods of one enterprise from the goods of another enterprise. Another thing that is important in the finding of the Justice Jagdishan's ratio, in whatever way they are uttered or spoken, slowly or quickly, perfectly or imperfectly, meticulously or carelessly, and whoever utters them, a foreigner or a native of India, wherever they are uttered in the noisy marketplace or in a calm and secluded area, over the phone or in person, the danger of confusion between the two phonetically allied names is imminent and unavoidable. Well, friends, he tried in his judgment to foresee the kind of danger that may occur, that may arise in the form of utterance of the word, because these two words, Ambal and Andal, though they are different divinities worshipped by different people, used in different parts of the world, or say different parts of the South India, still there lies a tangible danger of confusion in the marketplace, over a phone, or in whatever manner these words are uttered or spoken. Well, friends, another important aspect when it comes to this Ambal and Andal case law, you see, after Justice Jagdishan's finding in this case law in the Madras High Court, you see, the same matter went before the Supreme Court for the challenge made by the respondent in this case law, that the High Court has committed an error in deciding this. But, well, fortunately, the Supreme Court decided and reiterated the same ratio the way it was decided by the Madras High Court, speaking through Justice Jagdishan. And the Supreme Court said that whenever there arises a question of such similar words as proposed to be used as a trademark, the registering authority has to apply the question, has to see this precedent or a ratio decided by the Madras High Court, and after application of 11(1), they shall register, otherwise they shall not register the trademark. Because ultimate aim of the trademark law here is to preclude the confusion or danger to take place, is to, primarily prevent any such kind of a confusion or deception to take place in the marketplace. And one more thing that has been emphasized by the Supreme Court in this case, in a challenge made by the respondent, is, very clearly Supreme Court said that, the consumer in the marketplace is an unwary consumer having an imperfect recollection. So whenever the registering authority decides such matter, and as I told you friends, under section 11(1), the registering authority decides the matter suo moto, without anybody's behest or insistence or opposition proceedings filed by anybody. So whenever the registering authority applies this 11(1), they have to be very cautious and they have to perceive or put themselves into the shoes of the unwary consumer having an imperfect recollection. So in this case, the Supreme Court categorically held that though Ambal and Andal are different divinities worshipped separately, are different divinities of different sects, but still they are used on similar goods, and their use may lead to confusion in the marketplace to an unwary consumer. Moreover, the label registered of the respondent and used by the appellant in this case is a label having so many similarities or so many things that resembles with one another. In such a situation, that kind of a label shall not be given a registration, because it may lead to ultimately a confusion in the marketplace that would cheat the customers and deviate them from buying the desired good. Well friends, let us move ahead after this case law. I believe that you all have got the idea as far as section 11(1) is concerned and its application is concerned, and the nuances relating to section 1 are dealt by me through this case law are clear to all. With this presumption, I move ahead and I jump straight away to the next prohibition covered under section 11. The next prohibition covered under section 11 is the prohibition in the form of use of similar identical trademark on dissimilar goods, that has been covered under section 11(2). So friends, let us see what all is there under section 11(2) and what are the key features, noticeable features of section 11(2), which primarily prohibits and restricts the registration of a trademark which is identical or similar on dissimilar goods. Well, what is the distinction between 11.2 and 11.1? That has to be made out at this juncture, because it is very important to understand the distinction between 11.1 vis-a-vis to 11.2. Well friends, in the 11.1 we have seen a situation where similar identical trademark is used on similar identical goods or services. But on the other hand, in 11.2, similar identical trademark is used on dissimilar goods or services. So this case is quite interesting, because it's a case of prohibiting or opposing a trademark to be registered on dissimilar goods or on dissimilar services. So you can say it provides little more protection vis-a-vis to 11.1, because 11.1 is restricted in its scope only in a situation where a trademark is used on similar goods. Well friends, let us take up section 11.2, and it reads that a trademark which is identical with or similar to an earlier trademark and is to be registered for goods or services which are not similar to those for which the earlier trademark is registered in the name of a different proprietor. Well, one thing that is noticeable here friends, that it says that if the earlier trademark is registered, it has to be registered in the name of a different proprietor, and it has to be registered for goods or services which are not similar, which are dissimilar. Further it reads, that kind of a trademark which is identical or similar, registered for goods or services which are dissimilar, shall not be registered if or to the extent the earlier trademark is well-known trademark in India and the use of the later mark without due cause would take unfair advantage of or be detrimental to the distinctive character or repute of the earlier trademark. Well friends, the language is very ticklish, and this language tries to cover a very important and a pertinent aspect of the trademark practice or the application of the trademarks in the marketplace. Well, it is understood and it is sometimes presumed by the people planning to start their business ventures or planning to own a trademark or start a business with a trademark. They generally think that they are dealing in different goods or on dissimilar goods, so they are allowed to register their trademarks or they are allowed to use their trademarks without getting them registered on dissimilar goods. But it's not the case, because 11.2 puts and posits a prohibition on such uses or such dishonest uses made by the people. It is called a dishonest use because it's a kind of unauthorized, or say without any permission, they are trying to use a trademark or a similar or identical trademark of the earlier registered owner on dissimilar goods, and generally it is presumed that they can do so. They cannot. What section 11.2 covers straight away negates their assumption, their presumption that they are allowed to do so. Well friends, we go ahead with the interpretation of section 11.2 and we find that 11.2 in its purport has got certain noticeable aspects. What are those noticeable aspects of 11.2? Let us take up one by one. When we talk about 11.2, we see that it gets invoked only when the earlier mark is a well-known mark. This is what was written under 11.2 subclause 2, that this situation, if present, only then section 11.2 gets invoked. I mean the situation when the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark registered on dissimilar goods. Or another important aspect or a noticeable aspect of 11.2, it reads that it gets invoked when the use of the later mark without due cause would take unfair advantage of or be detrimental to the distinctive character or repute of the earlier trademark. Well, this part is very important to be understood at this juncture, because I am going to take up very quickly the analogy between 11.1, 2 and 11.3, which we have not yet discussed, but it becomes highly important to discuss 11.3 as well at this juncture. Well friends, 11.2 says that it is invoked when the earlier trademark is well known, and it is invoked when the use of the later mark without due cause would take unfair advantage of or be detrimental to the distinctive character or repute of the earlier trademark. We will understand one by one all these noticeable aspects of 11.2, but before that I would like to tell you that section 11.2 gets invoked when the earlier trademark is well known. So somehow one can say that the application of 11.2 is restricted only to the well-known trademarks or say only to those earlier trademarks which are of repute. If the earlier trademark or the already in use a trademark, if it is not of repute, then 11.2 cannot be invoked. For that matter, there are several other provisions available to be availed by the person. For example, 11.1 read along with 11.3 can be invoked for refusing such a registration by the registering authority. Moreover, section 9(2)(a), friends, which is an absolute ground for the refusal of registration. If you recall, it was the widest of all kind of an absolute ground for the refusal of registration covered by purview of section 9(2)(a), which says that if the trademark is going to cause confusion or deception, it shall not be registered. In that 9(2)(a), there was no mention of similar or dissimilar goods or services. It was an open kind of a absolute restriction provided through 9(2)(a), which can be invoked at any point of time by the registering authority to refuse the registration of any identical similar trademark used on dissimilar goods as well as on similar goods. So whenever the registrar or the registering authority applies 11.2, he or she has to keep in mind that it can be invoked only when the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark. If the earlier trademark is not a well-known trademark and it is a situation where identical or similar trademark is used on dissimilar goods, in that case the registering authority does have many other remedies or many other prohibitions available under section 9 and 11 of the Trademarks Act to refuse the registration. And the example of those provisions are 9(2)(a) on the one hand, which is kind of very wide provision or a prohibition. Blanket prohibition can be provided in the form of opposing or say in the form of refusing the registration of the applicant on the ground that it is leading to the confusion or deception to the mind of the public or on the part of the public. Moreover, 11.1 can also be invoked if it is read along with 11.3, because 11.3 says that the law does not allow the registration of a trademark which is liable to be prevented by purview of any law or in particular the law of passing off for a registered trademark. Moreover, 11.3 further reads that a trademark shall not be registered in the registering authority or in the register of the registering authority if it is liable to be prevented by the copyright law. So 11.1 read along with 11.3 provides a solution for the refusal of registration of those trademarks which are identical or similar trademarks but used on dissimilar goods and they are not well known. If they are well known, 11.2 straight away gets into the picture and can be applied appropriately and perfectly. Well, if we go ahead with the reading of 11.2 and its noticeable aspects, we find that it gets invoked when the use of the later mark without due cause would take unfair advantage of. Another restriction provided under 11.2 or another rider put under 11.2, it says first of all, the earlier trademark has to be a well-known trademark. It has to prove whether it is a well-known or not, and the test to determine whether a trademark is well-known, it has been provided under section 11.6 to 11.9 of the Trademarks Act 1999. Another rider, is to be seen or has to be proved is about the use of the later mark without due cause going to take the unfair advantage of the earlier well-known trademark. If the use of the later trademark is not going to make undue use of the unfair advantage of the earlier well-known trademark, then this 11.2 cannot be invoked. You see, this is the rider attached just to primarily restrict the dishonest practices for the purpose of trading on the reputation of the earlier trademarks. It happens in the marketplace that some miscreants or say some later applicants tries to register the trademark, and that trademark is already a trademark of repute and is a well-known trademark, and they with that try to take away the unfair advantage of that earlier trademark. They try to trade on the reputation of the earlier trademark. that is the dishonesty that they applies, and that is their dishonest facet that has to be taken into the consideration. If they do so, and if the registering authority finds that there lies a possible threat or a danger of such misuse to be done by them, or say such unfair advantage to be taken by them, or such trading to be done by them on the reputation of the earlier well-known trademark, then it gets invoked, and 11(2) prohibits the registration of that kind of a trademark. Well friends, one important finding that to my understanding is very pertinent to note here. I don't understand this logic of using the word unfair advantage. Even if they try to take the fair advantage of the earlier trademark, they shall not be allowed to be register their trademark. I mean, those later users shall not be allowed to register their trademarks even if they try to take a fair advantage of the repute of the earlier trademark, because by the purview of the trademark law, the person is given the exclusivity to use that trademark, the exclusivity to use it in the course of the trade, the exclusivity to appropriate capital and fame, reputation through that particular trademark. So if the later user, you see, with due cause tries to take, I say with due cause, the law says if he tries to trade on the reputation without due cause, if he takes a unfair advantage, but I use the word, what if he does it with a due cause and he tries to take a fair advantage, even then he shall not be allowed to register the trademark, except in the situations of section 12 where he or she is a honest and concurrent user, and except in a situation of section 33 where the earlier user gives his acquisitions to the later user to make use of the identical or similar trademark. Well friends, I believe this is a very interesting finding to be taken up for the further research by all the viewers or by the interested viewers, because this is a situation where I find the language little illogical and vague, because even the fair use made or proposed to be made by the later trademark user of the earlier well-known trademark kind of leads to what? Unfair advantage, or kind of leads to the detriment to the distinctive character of the earlier trademark. Thanks friends, I'll discuss it with you in the next session. The rest of the things I'll discuss with you in the next session. Thank you very much. Welcome back friends. We are discussing 11(2) and its important facets. So far we have seen that there are certain noticeable aspects of 11(2) which require our attention and deliberation. And so far we have seen that 11(2) can be invoked only when the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark. It can be invoked if that later user without due cause takes or tries to take the unfair advantage of the reputation of the earlier trademark, or if he tries to trade on the reputation of the earlier trademark. Another noticeable aspect of 11.2, it reads, and it is a rider on, you see, the application of 11.2, it says that 11.2 can be invoked only when the later user's proposed mark is going to cause detriment to the distinctive character or repute of the earlier trademark. Well friends, as far as the detriment to the distinctive character or repute of the earlier trademark is concerned, I believe all my viewers understand that a later user's mark, if it is similar or identical trademark, can cause a detriment to the distinctive character of the earlier trademark, and especially in a situation when the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark, because 11.2 cannot be invoked if the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark or is not a well-known trademark. Well friends, as far as distinctive characters assassination is concerned or detriment to be caused to the distinctive character is concerned, I would like to make you recall the deliberations done by us, or say the discussions done by me of section 9.1 as well as of 11.1, particularly 11.1, which reads that the trademark, identical trademark or a similar trademark shall not be registered if it is likely to cause the confusion, which includes the likelihood of association. Why I have tried to relate these two provisions, or say try to create an analogy between these two provisions, because whenever there occurs a detriment to the distinctive character, the doctrine of dilution becomes very imperative to be discussed. In the case of the dilution, we discuss that the distinctive character of the earlier trademark gets weakened or its strength gets loosened because of the later user's use of the similar or identical trademark. And this is what is going to happen when you see somebody tries to use identical or a similar trademark even though on dissimilar goods, but the earlier trademark was a well-known trademark, and because of his proposed use or because of his use, there is occurring a detriment to the distinctive character of the earlier trademark. That detriment here has to be interpreted, has to be construed. So in a very simple manner, this detriment here means that there is a possibility of dilution to take place of the earlier trademark's distinctive character. I gave you an example of this particular phenomenon, you see, by purview of a case law wherein the trademark Caltex was used. In that particular case law, Caltex was already registered a trademark on different goods, especially on petroleum products. I mean, their main business was on petroleum goods and petroleum products, and they were very well known in India because of the nature of the goods that they were dealing with, especially the petroleum goods. Caltex on petroleum goods was already there. The later user, Sundar Paramanand Lalwani, in that case, the respondent, you see, he tried to register the trademark Caltex on the watches manufactured and imported by him. Well, the court said that though the word Caltex, the identical trademark Caltex, is used on dissimilar goods, but the earlier trademark Caltex was used on petroleum goods, was of repute and is a well-known trademark. So the later user, the respondent Sundar Paramanand Lalwani, shall not be allowed to trade on the reputation of the earlier user, one who were dealing in the petroleum goods or petroleum products. Well friends, what we understand from this case law is about the doctrine of dilution, that it may happen that the later user, with the use of the similar or identical trademark on dissimilar goods, while trading on the reputation of the earlier trademark, may become so pervasive in the market, may become so present in the market, that people will start forgetting the earlier trademark Caltex on petroleum goods, and they will start associating Caltex as a trademark only on the watches. That is a peculiar case of a dilution where you see the earlier trademark's distinctive character and its repute is getting weakened with the use or gradual use of the later user's trademark Caltex, which is a similar or identical trademark. So whenever there arises a situation when you see earlier trademark is a well-known trademark, though the same trademark or identical trademark is used on dissimilar goods, if it is going to cause a detriment to the distinctive character, then it shall not be registered, or if it is going to cause a detriment to the repute of the earlier trademark, it shall not be registered. Well friends, these are some of the noticeable aspects of section 11.2. Let us move ahead and see why section 11 is so important, and especially 11.2 is so important, especially this part where it reads that it applies only, or it becomes or comes into the operation only when the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark. So it becomes highly incumbent for us to discuss and deliberate what constitutes well-known trademark, what makes a trademark well-known trademark, how a trademark becomes a well-known trademark. So there are certain key points given under the law itself, under section 11 itself, to determine as to what constitutes well-known and how to determine and decide, adjudicate whether the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark or not. And in the case of the application of 11.2, the trademark registrar, the registering authority, has to see whether the earlier trademark is well-known or not, and for establishing it, the applicant will not do anything. The prior user, the earlier user, has to prove that their trademark is well-known trademark, is of repute in the market, and for that and for the same they have to adduce certain evidences. By adducing those evidences, they prove in the market, or they prove in the before the registering authority that their trademark is a well-known trademark, is of a repute. So the key points to be taken into consideration by the registering authority are as follows. If you see, first of all, we need to understand the definition of the word well-known, and the word well-known has been defined under the Trademarks Act by purview of section 2 of the Trademarks Act under 2(1)ZZ, which reads as follows, which I will take up. And another thing, you see, we have to understand the test to determine well-known trademark given under section 11 itself, and the factors to be taken into consideration are to be seen to determine whether a trademark is well-known or not. Moreover, factors which are not required to be taken into consideration given under section 11.9 are also summarized and given in section 11 itself. So that's the holistic approach one has to apply while determining whether the trademark, whether the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark or not. And if it does not get proved that the earlier trademark is well-known, the law does not apply, the section 11.2 does not come into the operation, though 11.1 read along with 11.3, 9.2a, they will all remain for the person's disposal, for the opponent's disposal, for getting the trademark refused or getting the trademark's registration refused from the registering authority. Well friends, let us see the definition of the well-known trademark given under 2(1)ZZ, which reads, well-known trademark in relation to any goods or services means a mark which has become so to the substantial segment of the public. The very first thing that is given under this definition of well-known trademark, and whenever there arises a question of application of 11.2, this definition has to be fulfilled, its nuances has to be fulfilled by the earlier trademark. It says that in relation to any goods or services, well-known trademark means a mark which has become so to the substantial segment of the public, which uses such goods or receives such services, that the use of such mark in relation to other goods or services would be likely to be taken as indicating a connection in the course of trade or rendering of services between those goods or services and a person using the mark in relation to the first mentioned goods or services. Well, this definition is quite exhaustive, and it says that first of all, it has to be well known to the substantial segment of the public. And another feature, another important noticeable aspect of the definition of well known provided under 2(1)ZZ, it reads that to prove that the earlier trademark is well known, it has to be shown that this later user, by making use of the earlier trademark, is trying to indicate a connection of trade between the earlier user's goods or earlier user services with the later user's goods or services. If that connection is getting established, or if there lies a probability of that kind of a connection to be established between the earlier trademark and the later trademark, you see, then it satisfies the requirement to be called a well-known trademark. It can be said that the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark. There are two things that are given here as far as this definition is concerned. It has to be known to the substantial segment of the public, or say it has become well known to the substantial segment of the public. Well, it is highly debatable as to what would constitute the substantial segment of the public. There are certain case studies or say some judicial precedents which throws some light on this point as to what would constitute substantial segment of the public, but as such no definition is provided in the Trademarks Act as to what would constitute the substantial segment of the public. So for that matter we will rely, or for the interpretation of the same, we would rely on some of the judicial dictas and decisions or precedents on this particular point. Well friends, another important aspect given, which I just discussed, that if the later trademarks, if the later user's trademark, which is identical or similar trademark, establishes a connection in the trade with the earlier trademark or its goods or services in the mind of the consumer, then it can be called that the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark. Just read it out once again. This language is very important. Well-known trademark, you see, is a trademark which uses such goods or receives such services that the use of such mark in relation to other goods or services would be likely to be taken as indicating a connection in the course of trade or rendering of services between those goods or services and a person using the mark in relation to the first mentioned goods or services. So if it does indicate a connection in the course of trade or rendering of services between those goods or services, then it can be said that the earlier trademark is a well-known trademark. This is what the definition provides to us. We have some more key points to determine or to help us in determining as to what would be called a well-known trademark apart from the definition. Let us take those factors which determines the well-known character of the trademark given under section 11.6 to 11.9 together. 11.6 reads, to determine whether a trademark is a well-known or not, the knowledge or recognition of that trademark in the relevant section of the public must be there, including knowledge in India obtained as a result of promotion of the trademark. Well friends, this 11.6 is kind of supplements what has been said by purview of 2.1ZZ, and it reads that first of all the trademark must be recognized in the relevant section of the public, including knowledge of the trademark in India obtained as a result of promotion of the trademark. It has to be there. I mean, it can be a situation where the trademark is known to the substantial segment of the public through the result of promotion of that trademark, or sometimes through the result of the actual use of that trademark, but it covers even the use through the promotion. It does not restrict itself to the actual use. It reads that even through the promotion, if one trademark gets established in the market and becomes recognized by the substantial segment of the public, it shall be called a well-known trademark. Further it reads that another thing that has to be seen in determining whether it is a well-known trademark or not, the duration, extent and geographical area of any use of that trademark has to be seen. Particularly, you see, the extent of that trademark is very important. The duration as well as geographical area are equally important, but duration and geographical area can be determined by the evidencing, but extent of the use of that trademark is a question to be decided only by the registering authority by assessing the trademark and its prevalence in that geographical area, its prevalence in terms of the duration. Well friends, further you see it places another factor to be taken into consideration. It says the duration, extent and geographical area of any promotion of the trademark, including advertising or publicity and presentation at fairs or exhibition of the goods or services to which the trademark applies, has to be seen. The duration, extent, geographical area, as well as you see the advertising done or say use of that particular trademark through exhibitions, in fairs, or at such places where it becomes popular or where it gets recognized to the substantial segment of the public. So if these features are there in the trademark, then it can be said that it is a well-known trademark. Moreover, section 11(6) further reads that the duration and geographical area of any registration of or any application for registration of that trademark under this act, to the extent they reflect the use or recognition of that trademark, has to be seen. Further, the record of successful enforcement of rights in that trademark, in particular the extent to which the trademark has been recognized as a well-known trademark by any court or registrar under that record. Well friends, this is very important. If there lies any record of the successful enforcement of the right of the earlier trademark, then that becomes a very pertinent factor to make it a well-known trademark. Well, whenever you contest a trademark battle, the infringement suit, or for that matter any passing of action, you see what happens. The court in question or the court concerned decides the matter either in your favor or against you. If there exists any such successful litigation litigated by you, fought by you, where your right was enforced and it was decided by the court that your trademark is a trademark which is a well-known trademark, then that particular enforcement done by the court, by the previous court, by some other court anywhere in country, will become a very pertinent and a good ground to make the trademark well known or to determine that trademark a well known trademark. Well, in 11(7) there are few more grounds covered, or say few more factors covered to determine well known character of the trademark, and it reads that the registrar shall, while determining as to whether a trademark is known or recognized in a relevant section of the public for the purposes of subsection 6, there are some factors given to be taken into account. Well, first of all I would like to tell that 11(7) does not give us the grounds to determine a well-known mark. It gives us a grounds to determine whether the trademark is known to the recognized relevant section of the public for the purposes of section 6 or not. What are those grounds to be taken into the consideration? The number of actual or potential consumers of the goods or services. Well, it can be led through the evidence as to what is the number or the figure of actual or potential consumers of the goods or services. Then the number of persons involved in the channels of distribution of those goods or services. It can also be led through the evidence, through the statistics, that so many numbers of the people or so many people are engaged in the distribution of these goods or services. Then the business circle dealing with the goods or services to which that trademark applies is also to be seen while determining as to whether a trademark is known or recognized in a relevant section of the public for the purposes of section 6. Well, section 6 gives us certain factors to determine the well-known character, and through section 6 we get the idea that the trademark can be called a well-known trademark, read along with 21ZZ of the Trademarks Act, if it is known to the substantial segment of the public. And to prove whether it is known to the substantial segment or recognized to the substantial or relevant section of the public, 11(7) provides certain factors, and those factors are as follows, as highlighted by me, that the number of actual or potential users are to be placed before the court of law, the number of actual distributors engaged in the supply of those goods or services are to be procured before the court of law, and the business circle dealing with the goods or services to which the trademark applies is also to be procured before the court of law. Well friends, I am reminded of one important celebrated case where you see statistics was adduced before the court of law to prove that their trademark is a well-known trademark. Well friends, it is a case law of ITC Philip Morris versus Marlboro cigarettes, wherein you see the mark which was in contention is the mark which is W Namaste mark, or say welcome group mark, which is a logo in the form of W Namaste logo. It was in contention, and the Marlboro, the respondents in this case, they started using tilted M, which is a kind of deceptively similar mark used by them vis-a-vis, or say in relation to the earlier mark, which is a very well known mark, W Namaste mark of ITC group of people. They use that W Namaste mark in their hospitality services and their hotels. You see ITC Philip, ITC Moria, ITC in other parts of the country, they use that particular W Namaste logo in their hospitality industry, in their hospitality sector. Well, the Marlboro started manufacturing tobacco products, the cigarettes, with the tilted M having a flames behind that tilted M, posing a danger of similarity, deceptive similarity with the earlier trademark W Namaste logo. In that case, you see, to prove whether the earlier trademark was well known or not, ITC people provided the statistics and they provided the number of actual or potential users of those marks. They provided the number of persons involved in the distribution of goods or services. They provided the statistics of their business circle to prove that their W Namaste mark is recognized with their business, which is not only the hospitality business but other businesses also, especially the business of dealing in the cigarettes. The cigarettes that comes in the market of ITC are, Will cigarettes. They said that their trademark is a well-known trademark, and the later user, Marlboro Private Limited, cannot use their trademark without their appropriation, and they are trying to kind of confuse the people, or this may lead to association of the trademark, which may result into the dilution of their trademark. Well, this case law we will discuss later in a very exhaustive fashion as and when the occasion arises to discuss this case law. Let us move ahead and see some more factors to be taken into consideration. Under 11.6 and 11.7, some factors are given which are to be taken into the consideration. There are some more factors given under section 11.9 which the law says are not required to be taken into the consideration while determining whether the trademark is a well-known trademark or not. Well friends, section 11 is a widely worded, it has got around 11 subsections, and through 11.6 and 11.7 some positive factors are given to be taken into consideration to determine the well-known character of the trademark, read along with 2.1ZZ. But by purview of 11.9, the negative list is provided where it reads that these things are not to be seen. I mean, the registering authority, while determining whether a trademark is well-known or not, is not supposed to see these factors covered under 11.9. Let us take up those factors. The very first factor, it reads that the trademark has been used in India. There is no need to see whether a trademark has been used in India or not. It may be a situation where the trademark is not used in India. Still it can become a well-known trademark. So the registering authority, while determining the trademark as a well-known trademark, is not supposed to see whether a trademark is registered in India. It can be a trademark which is not in use in India and which is not registered in India. I have one example to tell you, or to make you understand. You see, in the case of N.R. Dongre versus Whirlpool Corporations, the use of the word Whirlpool done by N.R. Dongre in India was found impugned use, or was found obnoxious use made by him. Though the fact of the matter is that the Whirlpool trademark of the Whirlpool Corporation was not in use in India and was not registered in India. Still the court said that it has got a trans-border reputation and it is a well-known trademark, so it shall not be allowed to be imitated at all. So the use in India is not to be seen, that the trademark is registered in India is not to be seen, then that the application for the registration of the trademark has been filed in India or not is not to be seen. There is no need to see whether the registration application is pending, is filed or not. Even without the registration, a trademark can be called a well-known trademark. There are many such trademarks which are becoming a well-known trademark even without their registration application filed before Indian registry or before the registering authority in India. But it may be a possible situation where you see the same trademark is a well-known trademark and a registered trademark is in use in many jurisdictions of the world. The way in Anna Dongre versus Whirlpool Corporation, the trademark Whirlpool of Whirlpool Corporation was registered on electric goods or appliances in many jurisdictions of the world, but not in India. Their application though was pending in India, but even if you presume that their application is not pending, still they can be termed as a well-known trademark if they are relevant, if they are known to the relevant and substantial segment of the public, and they fulfill the factors provided and summarized under 11.6 read along with 11.7 and 21ZZ of the Trademarks Act 1999. If we move ahead, we see that one more factor which is not required to be seen to determine whether a trademark is well known. Whether a trademark is well known or not, it is not necessary to be seen. Or the trademark has been registered in, or in respect of which an application for registration has been filed in any jurisdiction other than India, or that the trademark is well known to the public at large in India. These are some of the factors which are not to be taken into the consideration. You see, there is no need to see that the trademark is well known, or it has been registered in, or in respect of which an application for registration is pending in India or in any other jurisdiction other than India. So these factors are not supposed to be seen, not supposed to be taken into consideration. And the last one is that the trademark need not to be known to the public at large in India. Where or to whom it is required to be known, it is required to be known and it is required to be recognizable by the substantial or the relevant segment of the public. As I told you at the time of discussing substantial segment of the public, it is very tough to decide as to what constitutes the substantial segment of the public. It can be, 100 people, or it may be millions and thousands of million people may together constitute the substantial segment of the public, but it depends actually on the use and on the extent, on the geographical area, on the duration of that particular trademark which is in use to determine what constitutes the substantial segment of the public. And it is the registering authority's discretion to decide as to what constitutes the substantial segment of the public. Well friends, with this I conclude today's discussion of well-known trademarks of the prohibitions covered under section 11, 1, 2 and 3. After that we will take up a case study on 11, 2 and 3. Especially 11.3 has yet to be discussed by me in a very elaborate manner along with its case study. So see you next time. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
With this note, thank you sir. Thank you so very much for giving us a very vivacious session. Dear friends, if you want to give your feedback are welcome. If you have any queries, then also you can mail us at info.cc@nic.in. And for accessing these lectures the number of times you want it, the lectures are there for you on YouTube concerning trademark and copyright, and this lecture also is going to be uploaded on YouTube very soon. So we would be meeting again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir.